talk Airbnb, Airbnb is one platform, but what we're really talking is short-term rentals. So short-term rentals is up to 6 weeks, and then you sort of move into a mid-term rental of what I'd sort of consider mid-term, which is sort of from that 1 to 2 months through to sort of 4 to 5 months. Is your mid-term rentals. So that's sort of, as much as Airbnb's the headline there, it's really that short-term rental market. And that comes from a whole heap of different platforms and a lot of direct deals as well, like that hospital deal that was direct with the hospital to us. It wasn't through Airbnb or another platform.
How do people identify what works for an Airbnb property?
Yeah, probably the best thing to do to start to sort of identify what returns you might be able to get or if a property will work at all is sort of no different to if you're looking at working out what a property is worth to sell or what a property is worth on the residential rental market. You essentially need to do a bit of a market analysis. Jump onto, obviously we're talking short-term rentals, so jumping onto Airbnb and finding properties similar to yours. You're never going to find something, you might, but very rarely will you find something exactly the same. But I recommend looking for one that's maybe slightly better and one that's slightly worse. And that's going to start to give you your range of sort of your upper end of the market to the lower end of what that property might be able to achieve. And just by looking through Airbnb, looking through the map, you'll start to see some comparable properties. And that's going to start to give you a bit of a ballpark. But that does only give sort of 50% of the picture. Obviously, with the short-term rentals, you've got that combination of your nightly rate plus your occupancy rate. And you need both to be strong to actually make it work.
Ooh. So what's that? So nightly rate, that makes sense, $150 a night. What's the occupancy rate?
Yeah, so obviously like with a long-term rental, you put a tenant in there for 12 months. They're in there for a 12-month lease. The chances are they might stay in that property for 3, 4, 5 years. In the current rental market that we've got, no one probably really looks at occupancy rates because you're pretty much guaranteed 100% occupancy for a long-term rental. Where for a short-term rental, depending on your location, you might be somewhere that, say like Phillip Island in Victoria, you might absolutely go crazy in the school holidays. And when the motorbike races are on, you might get absolutely insane rates. But then half the year, your property might sit vacant. So you need to factor in, you need to sort of work out the seasonality of that market. And there's a couple of ways you can do that. There is a few different websites like AirDNA will give you that seasonality and give you a bit of an idea of what periods are getting what prices. And the other way to do it is to find a property on Airbnb similar to yours, click on their calendar and it will show you what available days they've got coming up. And anything sort of 3-4 months in advance, I'd probably expect that to sit sort of empty anyway. But the stuff coming up in the next 4 to 5 weeks, if that calendar looks really solid and there's not many available days, that will start to give you a bit of an idea of the occupancy rate that you might be able to achieve.
How do you then what sort of processes do you need to have in place with an Airbnb? Like how do you actually go from, you got the property, what do you do next?
Yep, so you've got the property. That's sort of obviously step one, I guess, is that researching, working out what property you should be buying. No different to buying it as a permanent rental. There's always credit in being patient and finding that property that is a good deal and not just rushing in and buying the first one you see. So I think that's important to sort of point out, regardless of the purpose, be it if you're buying commercial real estate, residential real estate, short-term real estate, being patient and finding that right deal, you're going to make a lot of capital straight off the bat, regardless of the market. So that's step one, is research, know your market, find the property that's suitable. The second stage is setting it up, and that's where coming in and furnishing it, getting the right decor and really presenting it well makes such a big difference. If it's all right, I might show maybe even an example of a couple that we've just set up.
Let's do it. Yeah. Well, whilst you're doing that, can I ask you to multitask? Because I want to know.
Yeah, maybe.
You mentioned one sort of mistake that people make is buying in C and D areas. What are some of the other mistakes, that red flags that people should when they're looking to buy an Airbnb?
Looking at buying an Airbnb, red flag. So I guess, like I said, patience and finding that right deal. Yeah. Looking at the nightly rates at the wrong period. So if you're jumping in and looking at the nightly rates when the AFL's on in Melbourne, or like middle of winter and, in an area that does really well in winter and forgetting that it's completely seasonable, like you might, the snowfields, or maybe somewhere in summer that's, there's no tourists go to in winter. Looking at those seasonality and not factoring in the full year, I guess, is a bit of a trap for young players. So just sort of being conscious of that and realizing the seasonality of where you're buying into, just to make sure it actually works the whole year round and you're not just being lured in by a shiny return for a moment in time.
Yeah, and then that's going to cause someone to overpay on a property and say, you know what, I can spend an extra 20,000 because I'm going to get an extra X in rent, and then it just doesn't. It's not reality. You're going to get an extra 2 weeks worth of rent for that period, and then it just drops off the cliff to a more
correct. So that's a big part of it. But I'll just jump in and I'll share my screen. I just want to show a couple of properties that we've set up. So this is one that we've set up. This is one that we own ourselves. And this is the one that we actually originally rented out for the $150 per night.
Do you want to zoom in a bit?
Oh, can we? I don't know. Can we?
For those watching the podcast or listening to the podcast, you have to go over to YouTube or check it out on YouTube.
Can we see? Oh, now I've definitely cooked it. All right, let's jump into another one. Can we see this?
I can see it's big enough.
Let's not try and zoom.
Okay, let's not try and zoom. So this is one.
Wow, look at that! Look at that view. Is that water?
This is water. So I'm going to show. So this is the property when they first bought it.
Oh. Warts and all here we're seeing.
Warts and all. So this is when they first bought it. The view's sensational. The view hasn't changed.
Yep.
But you get an idea of how sexy that couch is.
Wow.
Wonder how many.
The stories that couch could tell.
If so couches could talk.
They originally set this up. So they bought this and it come fully furnished. They could have kept all this furniture.
Mm-hmm.
Our advice, obviously, was to not keep all the furniture. Those are actually well made here. But we essentially took it on and just modernised the furniture. So just light bright. We'd like to include a lot of greenery in the photos and into the properties. It just makes them really pop on Airbnb. View's the same, but you just sort of get an idea with the artwork, the greenery. New furniture in this one. This one I think cost somewhere around 20 grand for them to set this up and fully furnish it out. Mm-hmm. I'm going to see if I can reload this one, because this is one that we did, and that's, if you can furnish them yourself, you're going to save a lot of money. So this one we did with pretty much predominantly secondhand furniture. So off Facebook Marketplace, off Gumtree, and I think we furnished this one for about $3,500. So you can do it a lot cheaper. Once again, just the decor, the green plants, really trying to make it stand out amongst the other listings. And I think professional photography is such a big one as well when setting them up, just to make them look super clean, super attractive, make them look like something people would want to stay in.
The thing I was, because talking to that about the demo, the persona or the sort of person who's going to look at it or stay at your properties. The thing that came up as an objection is that there's all these party hooligans that are going to stay and make loud music and loud noise. So how do you handle that? Have you ever had a situation like that? And how do you handle that?
So a couple of things that we do to protect our landlords. First of all is we collect the guest ID. So government issued ID we collect and we secure basically through our software. And we also collect credit card details. Those two things in it of itself isn't going to stop someone, but it might make them think twice. It's a little bit of a deterrent. They've got the credit card details. They know exactly who I am and who's staying in the property. Mm-hmm. So that's first and foremost. Secondly, our neighbours, whoever lives next to the property, we're giving our number to. We're making it very clear who manages the property, who looks after the property. We're not trying to hide from them. Mm-hmm. And they're very, very quick to call if someone's not doing the right thing at a property. And then it's just a matter of having that conversation and getting on the front foot early. But the reality is, regardless of who you live next door to, like in a residential area, someone's going to throw that 30th, that 40th, that 50th birthday from time to time. And
I have.
Yep. So with the Airbnb properties, the risk of someone being noisy and a hooligan, I think, is probably less likely than just having a normal neighbour that throws that shindig once, twice, three, four every weekend.
I don't know if I'm jumping on that bandwagon. I think a lot of the Airbnbs I've been to are because we're having a Bucks night or a big birthday or a big party. So I don't know. I'm not so sold.
I think that's why usually with Airbnb, when I book one, or other people book it sort of somewhat out in the country. Like I probably wouldn't go and book one that's like in
I wouldn't book a unit. You definitely, exactly. You're not going to book it in an apartment.
It's going to be very obvious.
But also, actually, one thing that talking about, booking a big group is the amount of times when you did have someone hosting it, I would call you up, Shaun, and say, "Hey, Shaun, we want to book this place. We've got 12 people," and you're like, "No, you're not coming." you get knocked down because people don't want that kind of party at their place because obviously it upsets everybody.
Correct, and that's where those remote properties, and I've stayed in a lot of Airbnbs myself, and it's probably no different to being at home. You are that level of respectable. You're not gonna, and most people are very respectful. They might have music on till 9:30, 10 o'clock at night, but be it at home or be it in an Airbnb, if you got music blaring at 1 a.m., you're probably going to get a knock on your door at some point.
What are some of the not so rosy things about owning an Airbnb? What are some of the downsides and ugly sides of Airbnb life?
Yeah, probably the considerations I think people need to take into account is what we've just touched on in regards to legislation. It is a hotly debated topic at the moment, and probably is cheap political points for the politicians to come out and mess with it. So I think that needs to be considered that, what is plan B if that was to happen, and what does that look like? There is examples like Brisbane's talking about increasing the rates for people that have their properties on the short-term rental market. Something like that wouldn't be the end of the world if they were charging an extra $500 in rates. Whoop-de-doo, life goes on. But that's definitely one of the downsides. The second downside is someone doing malicious damage to your property, which that's a risk whether you're in the long-term rental market or the short-term rental market. I've been involved in the long-term rental market for almost a decade now, or coming up to over a decade. And be it in the long-term, be it in the short-term market, there is people that will do the wrong thing. And I think you just need to factor that in, make sure you've got the right insurance in place and the right management team, whether it's long-term rentals, short-term rentals, because, things can go wrong.
So I'd love to hear what essentials you think you need to have in an Airbnb. Tea, milk, coffee, wine, bathroom essentials, all of those type of things. Because those are the things that when you do go and you don't have milk or you don't have tea bags, it's like, oh, God, wouldn't it have to go to the shops? Like, here we go. And Billy is a fellow Airbnb owner. Awesome. Love it.
Beautiful.
What are some of the essentials? And are those essentials behind you right now?
Those essentials are behind me. We well and truly keep stock of our tea, milk, sugar, coffee, toilet paper. Big one's obviously the internet. Everyone expects internet no matter where they go. Like it's probably not even needing to be said, but internet's certainly something that you need to make sure the property's got a nice, reliable internet connection. A lot of people are working while on holidays, so making sure that's functioning properly and functioning how it should, it will rule out a lot of sort of guest communication and problems that don't need to be. But then your basic essentials is exactly what Joe said, what you would expect. If you were going on holidays, what you need to get through that 5, 6, 7, 8 days and supplying enough of it. So toilet paper, we normally try and if someone's in the property for a week, we make sure there's enough toilet paper for however many people there are for a week. Tea, coffee, milk, similar story. We're really trying to supply enough for that person to get through without needing to go to the shops to get those basic essentials.
And getting into the real nitty gritty, because I've stayed at a couple of Airbnbs and it's literally almost been a granny flat out the back, and they haven't got I want to say granny flat, it's almost been like a single room. They haven't got things like a stove or haven't got the sort of. So do you find that those sort of properties don't work so well of an Airbnb?
I think it comes back to expectations and price point. You know, if you're going somewhere and, you know, the average accommodation somewhere around $200 a night and you're paying $100 a night, but you know what you're getting yourself into, you know, you're aware there's no kitchen facilities. You're aware you're just getting a room.
Okay.
It's all price driven at the end of the day, price driven and expectations. Where if you're paying, you know, $1,000 a night, you're probably going to expect there's some pretty good frying pans, definitely a toaster, so on and so forth.
Yeah.
What are some of the little extras that you can do to spice things up for people? Like, are there things that you just think, oh, actually, I didn't even think, like a bottle of wine, or what are there any like extras that go the extra mile for people that are trying to rent theirs?
It's so funny. We include bottles of water. So no matter, depending on how many guests there are, we include bottles of water, a packet of just chips, like just potato chips, and a packet of Oreos. And the amount of like positive feedback that we get over something, I think it's like we get it in bulk. And I think it's like $4 worth of stuff that we provide. And the amount of like positive feedback is just obscene. So just providing that. And I think while the wine's great and providing wine and alcohol, the majority of people have just got off an aeroplane, just got out of a taxi. They're either hungry or thirsty or both. And I think that has a lot more mileage to it, providing a couple of snacks and some bottles of cold water. People seem to be really grateful for.
Yeah, I think the risk you run with alcohol is in 2023 there are more and more people that aren't necessarily drinking. So I suppose no harm, but yeah.
But even like you've got the people that don't drink. But if you're spending less than maybe $20 on a bottle of wine, the chances are it's going to be pretty shitty and not to someone's liking anyway. So that's where Oreos, chips, and water, like you sort of can't go wrong.
Yeah, and it's only $5. Yeah. One thing that you pointed out that with those pictures were that all of them were units. What about, like, what's the perfect property types for Airbnb? Is there a specific 3-bed, 2-bath, 2-bed, 1-bath, 3-bed, 2-bath, houses, large houses, lots of land? Like, what looks good? What works?
Yeah. So if we're looking at the short-term rental market just purely as a cash flow play, that's where the apartments are so attractive. We've got apartments in basically the Cairns City that were somewhere around that sort of 350,000, 400,000. That are getting a better cash flow than houses worth over $1 million out of the city a little bit. So the units are very attractive, but that's mainly because of the location of the units. If you had a house right in the CBD, it would do very well, but you're obviously paying a lot more for a house right in the middle of the CBD than you would an apartment, and then the returns would be pretty comparable.
So so you're kind of saying like, there needs to be a reason why people come to your area. Why people come to Cronulla, for instance, is a beautiful beach. Why people go to Cairns, beautiful, beautiful waterfront views. They don't go into the back over the hills. Yeah, don't put an Airbnb there. Get to where the star attraction is, or get as close to that as possible. If you can have and afford a house, go there. But if you can't, a unit may be a better way.
So a couple of things are also worth considering. So if it is a house and it is out of the main sort of location, Cairns, obviously our CBD, Cronulla, closer to the beachfront, the better. If you're out of that location, the property needs to become a destination in and of itself. If you've got amazing house with beautiful pools and, a tennis court and bars and saunas, then the house becomes a destination and people don't need to leave the house and then they'll book it. So if the location doesn't have all that stuff on, if the location isn't the best, if the house does have that destination feel, you will get bookings.
Yeah.